Hello, welcome to the webinar. I'm Kate Dalinger of Wellesley College Career Education. I'm the Director of Fellowship Programs, and I've been doing fellowships advising for more than a decade. I'm joined by my colleague, Caitlin Roberts-Donovan, who's the Program Manager for Fellowships. And we are here to talk about writing proposals because lots of fellowships, whether it's things like Fulbright or Watson or the Davis Projects for Peace, the Knoffel, or the Stevens, or a myriad of other fellowships, ask you to write a proposal. And we know how daunting that can be, so we want to give you some help with that. Let's get started. We're delighted you could join us. Where do I even begin? Maybe you've heard of some of those amazing opportunities. You've read some of the things on our website. You're intrigued by a fellowship. Maybe you've seen one of those stories about somebody winning something amazing. Maybe you think, wow, that sounds really cool, but I couldn't do that. Here's the secret. No one starts with an idea like the kind of thing that you may have read about on a website or somewhere else or talked with a friend about. Everybody starts with an inkling of something. Step by step, from nebulous, uncertain beginnings, piece by piece, over time, is how you put a proposal together, whether for whatever kind of fellowship it is. We'll walk you through some questions to ask, some exercises that you might want to take some time to do while we're online together, or maybe afterwards, some tips and resources, and then there'll be lots of time for Q&A at the end. And I really want to tailor this according to the particular questions and concerns that you have. If you are asking a question or wondering about something, don't be shy. Somebody else might be really glad that you thought of it, or really glad that you dared to ask the question because they were probably wondering the same thing. So help each other out.
As we go, this is Caitlin. As we go, please feel free to hop into the group chat and post your questions there in case you want to ask a question as we go. There will also be time at the end. But again, feel free to post your questions as you have them.
Great, thank you. So where to begin? By exploring what's out there. What are the fellowships? What kinds of things have people done even? What possibilities? Maybe an idea or a fellowship sounds intriguing, but you have no idea what you'd do with it. See what other people have done. See what that sparks in you. What curiosity, what questions does it raise for you? What kinds of possibilities does it raise for you? That's the great place to begin. I imagine you've already done some of that exploration, which is why you've joined this webinar. If not, no worries. We're here to help. What you might want to do to begin with, and this is one of those exercises you might like to try at home, is one place to begin is to imagine that I have a magic wand. If I could wave it and grant your wish, if you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you do? It's a magic wand, so for these few minutes, you don't have to worry about money, about practical considerations, about failure, about anything. If you could do anything with the help of magic, what would it be? I know this sounds like a daft question, completely divorced from reality, but bear with me, there's a point to this. Jot down an idea or three right now. No idea is too silly, too ambitious, nothing. Stumped? Okay. Think about what you're doing when all of a sudden you look at the clock and time has passed without your having noticed it. What are you willing to get up early for, stay up late for, carve time out of your busy schedule for? What might you want to do more of if you could? Maybe you start with curiosity about something, a question you'd like to answer, something you'd like to try. Maybe you start with a problem or a need you'd like to address, whether it's your own or someone else's, whether it's a small thing or a big problem or a big need. No matter how zany or impractical your secret heart of hearts answer to this magic wand question, it's worth listening to that still small voice inside of you. Because a fellowship can be the magic wand that makes anything possible and that you might not be able to pursue otherwise. But even without that, just daring to think about what you'd really like to do is powerful. No matter how impractical the thing you'd like to do or how impossible it sounds, it can give you some valuable guideposts to help you narrow down real world options and help you take steps in the right direction. It's a valuable exercise no matter how daft it sounds. So do think about it, whether it's today or later. If I had a magic wand and anything were possible, what would you do? That's the kernel of a proposal, potentially. The next thing to do while you're thinking, and I don't know about you, but I always think that I don't actually know what I think about something until I try to write about it. Try explaining it, write it down. What does it mean? What might you need to tackle that question, that problem? If there's something that you might like to do in the longer term, or that secret heart of hearts desire is something that looks sort of out there and impossible, what are some of the intermediate steps, the skills, the experiences, the qualifications that you need to try to acquire to kind of help you get there? And might a fellowship help you acquire them? So starting to look not only at what you'd like to do, but what kinds of possibilities there are out there together makes sense. Okay, some of you have probably been really patient with me because you already have a great idea, and that's why you joined this. So how do you get it to take shape? Again, do a little research. What would it mean to explore this? Who's doing really interesting work related to it? Read around the subject. Your Wellesley students and graduates, put your mad research skills to good use. Where would be interesting places to explore your ideas? What would be the sorts of ins to allow you to do that? What is it that you need? Start to break that down. Talk to people. You don't have to wait until your ideas are fully formed. Bounce ideas off folks. And it may be that you want to bounce ideas off folks who taught you in a relevant class to the idea that you have, or folks who are doing work in relevant fields. It may be with alumni who are doing things in relevant areas, geographic or industry-wise or otherwise. But also, you never know what somebody's college roommate did, or what their sister-in-law does, or what their neighbor does, and what kinds of things they may know about or think about in their spare time, or that you don't know anything about, or the kinds of people they may be able to connect you to. The more you talk about ideas, it helps you flesh them out, and it also helps you make connections, which can be really valuable as you're starting to put your proposal together. Somebody may be able to say, oh, wow, you know what? I know somebody who's doing really interesting work. Maybe they can make a connection that'll help you make your project feasible.
I would add one thing to that. There may be a lot of things out there that you don't even know about. There are so many things out there and so many possibilities. And the more people that you talk to, you may think, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Exactly.
That's a really cool moment.
Exactly. Yep. Think outside the box. Some fellowships, like the Watson, like the Knopfel, the Stevens, really want you to think creatively, not just about, for example, how do I approach an academic research project, but they're experiential fellowships. If you were to approach a problem outside the structure and the toolbox and the approach of an academic discipline, or outside the structure of an internship or a job, what would approaching that question or problem look like? Think about that for a little bit. Even if you're proposing an academic research project or something that's pretty straightforward, even if you're not applying for something outside the box like Watson, it's always worth thinking about, what are those different approaches that I hadn't even thought of? As Caitlin said, I didn't even know that was a thing. Try to think creatively about, what, if this weren't an academic research project, if I weren't going to do this in academic setting, if I weren't going to do this according to whatever it is, What might be another way of looking at this? Looking at a question or a problem from lots of different angles helps you get a better sense of what exactly you do want to do, and may help you come up with some really creative problem solving in terms of ways to do it. I know a lot of this starts sounding really amorphous, but the more you delve into the question, the more you get a handle on what exactly it is you're trying to do and what exactly you're proposing to do. You'll be able to start to cut it up into pieces, to break it up into doable pieces. One of the best pieces of advice when I was working on my doctoral dissertation research was from my research supervisor, who said, don't, for heaven's sakes, think about the fact that you're writing a doctoral dissertation. That's just so big and intractable a thing. You can't get a handle on it. Think about this as you're writing the literature review, you're explaining this particular question, you're explaining this particular piece of the research. Whatever your proposal is, start to break it up into pieces and to think about people you'd talk to, things you want to read, resources you'd need to make your project feasible, lots of different things. More about that in a minute. But again, don't think about this as like, I'm doing a project, I'm writing my proposal for Watson. I mean, like, you can certainly do that, but also at a certain point, it's really helpful to break it up into smaller things. The next couple of sections, we're going to talk about content and style. And content actually can be really pretty straightforward. Start with, so what exactly are you going to be doing? Are you going to be studying honeybees, exploring urban spaces, learning to improve your ballet technique? What exactly are you proposing to do with this fellowship? Where would you go to do this? When would you do this? What's your itinerary look like? The chronology, the specific locations, not just I want to go to X country or Y city, but what kinds of organizations within that? How specific can you be? How exactly would you do your work, your project? How would you carry out your proposal? With whom would you collaborate? Who are the folks you need? What other resources do you need on the ground to make your proposal feasible? Try to imagine actually doing it. What might a day look like? What might the third day or the 35th or the 300th day look like? What actually do you need to make that work, and who would you need to talk to, as well as where would you go and when? Another really important piece, in addition to those practical considerations, is the why. Don't just tell us, by the way, why that you're interested in or passionate about whatever it is you're proposing to do. Hopefully everybody who's applying for the fellowship is interested in and passionate about it. Help the reader see why the rest of us should care. Why is this proposal interesting to might it be interesting to somebody else? Or why might this proposal be significant in the grander scheme of things, whether it's a research project that actually contributes to the body of knowledge in some way, shape, or form, or how it helps you advance towards a set goal, or get us engaged. I'm an early medieval historian, and I know when I go to dinner parties, if people ask me about my academic interests, and I can start that conversation in a way that makes them turn to the person on the other side of them and start a conversation about anything other than what I've just been talking about. On the other hand, if I start the conversation another way, and believe me, I work on bizarre esoteric stuff, I can draw people in and get them to say, wow, ooh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more. I had no idea that was even a thing. That's what you're looking for in this proposal. You want the reader to be just as excited about what it is that you're proposing to do as you are. And the way to do that is not to tell them that you're excited or passionate about them, but to show them why it's exciting and interesting. In addition to why, tell us the kind of part of the why is the background of where your proposal comes from, why you're making this proposal, how you acquired the background skills and experience, not only to be interested in this, but to make this project feasible. And also show us where you're hoping this opportunity might take you afterwards, how it might help you in future do something interesting and valuable. Helping a committee, and you're essentially asking a fellowship committee to make an investment in you in a very real and practical sense. Show them what kind of return on investment you might be. Help them see that not only is this an interesting project that you are qualified to carry out and that is feasible, but that if they give you this opportunity as opposed to somebody else with an equally interesting and feasible proposal, where might you run with that opportunity afterwards? Because that's part of what gets somebody excited about your proposal.
I'll just break in here for a minute just to note that we have had a few new people join. So at any time, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type it into the group chat box and we can answer it as we go. There'll also be time at the end for questions if you have them. So feel free to jump in at any time.
And because this is recorded and folks may be viewing it later, no worries. You can always email fellowships@wellesley.edu and we'll answer your questions that way. Okay, we've talked about excitement, we've talked about interest, we've talked about feasibility. One of the things you want to think about are challenges. What are some of the challenges that you might face? Believe it or not, sometimes readers can anticipate these as well as you can. And the best thing to do is to head them off at the pass, address them straight on. Yep, here's some challenges I can foresee. And here are some ideas that I have about how I might meet those challenges. You don't have to be able to start your proposal with like, yep, I have all the answers. Here's how I'm going to meet these challenges. But as you're working on your proposal, if you run up against something, you're like, oh gosh, I don't know how I'm going to solve that. Brainstorm, talk to people, do research to try to come up with an idea of how might you address those challenges. That doesn't weaken your proposal, it makes it sound much more feasible. Because the reality of all of these proposals with fellowships is that the best laid plans go awry on a regular basis out in the real world. And so one of the things that helps a committee believe that you could actually do this is to say, yep, I'm thinking about that, and you know what? I'm starting to think about how I might meet some of those challenges, including some of the things that, like, I know there are challenges I can't anticipate ahead of time, but here are some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of support structures and other things so that I can meet even unanticipated challenges.
Something to add is that no one expects you to be a superhero, either DC or Marvel or otherwise. What you should emphasize is your flexibility and your willingness to meet these things as they come head on. So again, nobody's expecting you to be invincible or have all the answers.
Exactly right. More practically speaking, in terms of challenges, we all want to do things the right way. And so part of what that involves is ethics. And there are lots of ways to learn to do things the right way. And there are lots of ways that Wellesley students and graduates can learn these things, whether you engage with our fabulous colleagues in civic engagement or the Wellesley Signature internship programs. And I've given you the URLs to those. Note that, for example, civic engagement offers some fabulous trainings and reflection exercises, as does internships. For those of you who have graduated already, think creatively about what other experiences may have helped you approach this project in the right way and do things in the best possible way, especially if you're thinking about solving a problem or addressing a need. You want to do it the right way. And if you're working particularly with vulnerable populations, the last thing you want to do is make them more vulnerable. One of the things to be thinking about is kind of the golden rule. How might you go about making thoughtful use of the resources available and of the generosity of, say, funders or your hosts in the local community? Be humble. Think about all of the things, the ways that you have to learn about how to do this right. More concretely, there are also ethical considerations that arise. For example, if you're proposing service involving clinical experience, have a look, for example, at the AAMC's guidelines to help you avoid doing things that might not be in the best interests of the folks that you're working with. Other terrific resources, whether or not you're thinking about research, can be found on the wellesley.edu sponsored research website that has links to all kinds of good things, not only if you are considering research, but as you're thinking about sort of ethical guidelines and how to do things the right way. Looking at these things ahead of time, however they may impinge on your project, makes your proposal that much stronger. And if you are proposing research, for example, you may literally have to consider some of the sort of how you might go about getting, for example, clearance from an institutional review board, if that's appropriate. I know that those things can be overwhelming. There are all kinds of, again, great resources to help, including scholars in the field. I'm always happy to help you field some of those questions as well. Once you've started to nail down the who, what, when, where, why, some of the challenges, the ethics, and other things, the other important part about writing a really good fellowship proposal is the style. And I don't mean to say that it needs to look pretty or sound beautiful. Yes, for the most part, a successful proposal is much more about the content than the style. But it's worth thinking about style because it can help you make your case. Being succinct, specific, and clear, answering the question asked. What is it that the instructions for the application ask you to do? Are there questions associated? Are there essay prompts that you need to answer? What's the mission of the fellowship, and how can you show how what you're proposing to do aligns beautifully with the mission of the fellowship, how it answers the questions that you're asked in the prompts, etc. It is always helpful to be as specific as possible so that, for example, instead of just sort of saying, I'm passionately interested in research, to be able to say, I'm passionately interested in this specific area of research, and if we can answer this question, here's what that in turn might mean, and that's why this is exciting. Or here's a really big idea, and let me give you a specific example or two to illustrate what it is that I'm talking about. It gives folks a handle on a big idea. And it can be really helpful, especially if you are dealing with a non-specialist audience. If you are talking to or writing for an audience that is of specialists in different fields, it's worth thinking about how transparent what you're proposing to do will be to somebody who's not a specialist in your field. Or if you're writing for a committee that's not a Wellesley College community committee, whether it's Wellesley faculty or staff or alumni or whatever, if you're writing for an external audience, will they understand some of the things you're talking about? Does everybody know what CS means? I'm here to tell you, as somebody who only came to the Wellesley community 2 years ago, I had no idea it meant computer science. How will they know what an Albright Fellowship is, or what being a first-year mentor means? It's always worth thinking about whether or not what you're writing about is going to be transparent and clear to your audience. Because if your audience can't follow you, it's really hard to persuade them. Some pro tips to help you keep on track involve, again, thinking about who's your audience, but it's also about being honest. Be true to yourself. Write what you really want to do, what really matters. Don't try to pretzel yourself into something that you think the committee is looking for. When I talked about trying to answer the question asked and look at the mission of the fellowship, it was really so that you could see what are the most important things about me and about this proposal for the committee to know, so that they can see how I genuinely and how my project genuinely aligns with what it is that they're doing. And if they don't align, let's find something else where it will align. Fellowship committees are actually, and again, I've been doing this for more than a decade, pretty good at reading between the lines and seeing whether or not you're being honest, whether or not this is really authentic, whether or not this really makes sense. So play to your strengths, be yourself, and isn't that a relief? Just be yourself. And that's going to be a really good thing to do in a proposal. Fess up when you don't know the answer or when you can foresee a challenge. As Caitlin said, you're not expected to be a superhero. Part of why you're proposing the fellowship is that you want to learn and grow and try something new and gain experience. And so, it's totally fair and reasonable and realistic to say, here are some things that I don't know. What you may do too is to be able to say, okay, so I don't know the answer, but here's how I'm approaching it. Or here are some possibilities. Here's the problem I want to tackle. And looking at doing that may look like this, or it may look like that. Again, that's not weakening something. You don't have to be artificially more certain than you are. Tell us what you do know and where you are in the process. Again, remember to break this up into pieces. Go back to some of the key questions, the who, what, when, where, why. Don't worry about word limits if there are word limits until later. Write as much as you want to and figure out what the really essential points are, and that will help you edit things down, and you can get help with that.
I'd love to add that the best piece of advice that I ever got in terms of writing my dissertation was that you have to have something to edit.
Yep.
You can't edit nothing. So what that means is that I know it's really hard for a lot of people. You really want the first thing that comes out to be this beautiful, polished, articulate piece of work that just blows everybody away. That's not likely to happen, and that's totally fine. So get out the thing that you want to get out, put it on a page. It'll be great, and it'll be something to edit. It'll be something that you can polish, that you can get help polishing, and you can go from there.
Exactly right. The other thing is, some of you may be thinking about, for example, optional draft deadlines on campus for various upcoming competitions. Part of why we did that is to give you an earlier deadline to shoot for. I don't know about you. I often, I get it done by when I have to, and I aspire to get things done ahead of time, and I don't always manage that. So we're trying to give you something, a deadline to help you plan and to give you something to shoot for that's earlier. The other thing is that the draft that you submit, whether it's for a deadline or for somebody else to look at and give you feedback on, certainly if it's for something that Caitlin and I might look at, we don't have any rules about what a draft has to look like or how good it has to be before it's worth our time. We're here to help whenever in the writing process you would like help or feedback. It can be bullet points, it can be stream of consciousness. As Caitlin said, get something down on the page, and then we can go from there. It's always helpful to see where you are in the process, and then we can ask lots of questions. That's why I personally really prefer always to do feedback via an appointment so that we can have a conversation, so you're not trying to interpret cryptic email comments or something. And so that I can ask questions. I can say, wow, that thing you mentioned there is really interesting. Tell me more. And let's together see where that takes us. So again, don't worry about drafts having to be perfect. One of the other tips that I got when I was a first year in college was done is good. So get something down on the page and see where it will take you. You don't get anywhere if you don't try something. Speaking of which, I want to end by saying, take a chance. You've nothing to lose and everything to gain. Writing a proposal can be really daunting, but it doesn't need to be. Take it apart piece by piece, map out a timeline for yourself, set aside a little bit of time every day or every week between now and whatever deadline you're working to, and see where it takes you. None of this is wasted effort if the least that comes out of this is a clearer sense of what you want to do and how you need to approach getting there, and you've had some practice making a case for yourself and persuading other people to do that. None of it is wasted effort. Again, I've watched thousands of people over the years prove that that's true, that there's value in the process. And so one of the best things that you can do is to give yourself a little space to explore an idea, to do a little research, to talk to people, to practice making a case for yourself. You never know where it might lead, and it might lead in really interesting directions. I worked not long ago with a wonderful Wellesley graduate who was doing fabulous work on an application for the Fulbright. Really, really good work. We talked about different drafts, revised various things, delved into questions, followed things in unexpected directions. And right before the deadline, this graduate vanished off the radar screen and didn't submit an application. And I thought, oh my goodness, what happened? So I reached out, and the graduate said, oh, you know what? Actually, I've decided not to apply for Fulbright this year. I landed my dream job. That's a success. The graduate didn't apply for Fulbright, but landed the dream job. And I swear it was in part because of the really good work the graduate had put into thinking about what's the work I want to do? Where does that come from? How am I qualified to do it? And the practice making the case for that. I'm absolutely positive that that contributed to landing the dream job. If that's the least that happens, whether or not you land your dream job, again, none of this is wasted effort. And none of us is going to feel that you have wasted our time by talking to us or by coming to workshops or by doing essay review or any of the rest of it. That includes, by the way, people that you might talk to as mentors and potential recommenders. One of the things that I sometimes get asked is, oh, I don't know if I can do this. If I don't win, I feel like I'll be letting everybody down, all the people who wrote in support of my application and everything. Again, I've worked with lots and lots of folks who've written letters, and they never feel that that's a waste of time. Ask in timely fashion, give people a chance to talk with you about what it is you're proposing to do, learn more about what it is that you're proposing to do, maybe even, contribute to the development of your proposal so that they're excited about it and they feel buy-in and they know more about it and can write a stronger, more specific letter more easily. If you do all of those things, nobody's ever going to feel that that's a waste of time, because it always helps you advance and to learn something and to get somewhere. So you really don't have anything to lose, but everything to gain. So there are questions that you doubtless have and things that you were hoping that we would cover today that maybe we haven't covered. How can we help? What would you like to know?
And I am monitoring the group chat right now, so if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Oh, great, we have something from Natalia. Are there any example proposals we can look at?
Oh, that's an excellent question. There are sample proposals all over the internet for all kinds of things, depending on what kind of fellowship you're talking about. What I always suggest to people is that while I absolutely understand your motivation, you're learning to write a new genre and wanting to read some samples makes perfect sense. Don't look at samples until you've had a really good try at writing your own. It's hard to hear what you have to say with other people's voices in your ears. And the other thing is that there is no formula for writing a successful proposal. Every proposal I've ever seen that was strong was a little bit different from every other one. And so I know that's frustrating to hear, but part of this is figuring out what's really important to you about your proposal. And so once you've had a really serious go at writing your own draft, if you're stuck, that might be a good time to look at samples. One of the caveats about samples that are out there is that even if, for example, you know that something is an essay that was used to win a fellowship, sometimes people win fellowships despite a not particularly well-written application. I know, it's strange but true. This does not say that you should not do your level best to write the strongest possible application that you can, but you never know necessarily whether or not that's really a good example to be looking at. And even if it is a good example, it's a good representation of that person's project, not necessarily of yours. Each of you has your own story to tell. Caitlin and I are here to help you tell your story your way, to pitch your proposal in the most positive and productive and persuasive way. I wish I had a better answer to that, but I think, be wary of exemplars, I guess, is the best thing I can suggest to you.
I would also add that I imagine some people would say, well, I don't have a story. You do, believe me. You are at Wellesley, you are pursuing your studies, you are passionate about something somewhere, and so don't worry about you have a story, we promise, and we will do all of our best to help get it there.
And seriously, some fellowships, for example, the Fulbright gives some really fabulous tips. There's the application components where they spell out exactly what it is that they're looking for and what you should do, down to things like what font should you use and how big should the margins be. Always follow the directions. But they also give you some really helpful questions to consider as you're working on a statement of grant purpose, as you're thinking about how that intersects with a personal statement. And that, in fact, is a really good point to consider. A proposal may be just one piece of many that go into an application. And you always want to think about how the different pieces of the application together add up to something more than the sum of the parts. And that's the other nice thing, is like not everything's going to fit into the proposal necessarily. Some of it may be in a personal statement, may be in the references that are submitted in support of your application. It may support a transcript, a resume, samples of work. There are lots of different pieces, and whatever your application is, think about all the different pieces that go up to create that total application, even if it's short answer things. To go back to the Fulbright example of community engagement. Again, Watson has some various moving parts, and not everything has to go into the proposal. So think about how you can use the various pieces of the application to tell different parts of the story and to make your proposal sound feasible, if that makes sense.
Any other questions? Please feel free to chime in.
Sometimes you can get creative. For example, Wellesley's Knoffel asks not so much for a project proposal in narrative form, but a statement of interest and an itinerary in outline form. Neither one of those two pieces can be more than 2 pages. And so you want to think about how you pitch your idea, and then even an outline itinerary can give a lot of good stuff. It can include like questions you're proposing to ask in various places. It can include specific contacts you have. It can include, get creative about how you can flesh out the details of whatever it is you're proposing within whatever word limits or page limits a particular application may impose. I know folks often get frustrated by limitations. You'd be surprised how much people can learn in a really short space and how much can be conveyed by just a few words. In a completely different arena, think about haiku, which is so limited in terms of the numbers of syllables one can use, and yet a good haiku communicates huge amounts. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So sometimes, what can you do to find the right syllables or the picture that's going to convince folks, that's going to convey the kind of thing that you really want to do? There are lots of possibilities. Again, basic questions. If the application that you're dealing with, and most of them do, if you dig, give you some really specific information about what's the mission of the fellowship, what exactly are we looking for in a proposal, as I said, sometimes down to formats and whatnot, and fonts. The very basic questions that every fellowship essentially proposal wants you to answer are those kind of, the basic questions of journalism: who, what, when, where, why. If you haven't answered those questions, go back and see how you can answer them. And again, talk to people. You don't have to write a proposal in a vacuum or all by yourself, as smart and capable as you are as Wellesley students and graduates. There are folks who would love to help. For some things, for example, you might actually develop a proposal with the support and the input of potential collaborators. That strikes me as a really smart way to go about doing something like this. Because again, you're not doing this in a vacuum. You'd always need the support of somebody else for whatever it is you're proposing to do, even if it's solo travel a la Watson. When you're in particular locations, you'll be dependent upon other people for an into the community to talk to you, to show you how to do something, to give you access to resources in some way, shape, or form. So thinking about what are the things that you would need to make your project a reality. How would you go about filling those things out? How would you, even if you can't tell us, like, I have all the answers to that, what are you doing to find the answers to that? Or what might you do as you go to fill the answers to those questions in? But the more you can give us up front, the more excited you can make the reader, the more easily the reader can imagine you actually doing this, the better. Again, there's no one right or wrong way to do this. There are lots of different ways to write a strong fellowship proposal, just as there are to write a strong personal statement. It would be so much easier if I could give you the formula for how to do this right. There isn't one, which I know is frustrating, but that's the good news, right? How can you best make your case for yourself? That's one of the challenges of writing a proposal in the first place, but that's also part of what will make your proposal stand out from sometimes hundreds or thousands of other proposals that committees will read, to try to find the ones that they might want to fund. And so having this be in your voice and telling what you're excited about and exactly what you're proposing to do is one of the ways that your application stands out, just as you are not like any other person. You have your own story to tell, as Caitlin said, and we are so excited to be part of helping you tell your story in the best possible way for you. Anything else? If I can leave you with one last idea, hopefully it's that this is in fact doable, one step at a time, and that done is good. The only guarantee with fellowships is if you don't apply, you can't possibly be offered one of these opportunities. And yet there's always a chance to learn.
Well, we have a question about the Watson. For the Watson, and I assume with other fellowships, there are quote unquote selection criteria they'd like to see. For example, leadership, imagination, independence, etc. How explicit would we be in showing those qualities in our application? Maybe the personal statement more than the proposal?
That's an excellent question. And I think, again, that goes back to what I was talking about with thinking about the different pieces of the application. Some things can best be told by a transcript, somebody writing a letter of reference. Sometimes the details or some of the specifics of your background and experience or your leadership or other kinds of things can be suggested in a resume or CV or some of the short answers associated with various applications. Some things are more related to like how you'd actually make the project work, and maybe that's more for the proposal. And some things are more about like, who is this person making this proposal? And what are some of the things that you've done, or how do you approach a problem? And that comes out more in the personal statement. You don't have to say, for example, like, I have leadership qualities, or I'm curious about the world. Like, the way that you talk about a class that intrigues you and how you followed that curiosity, the way you talk about moving to a new city and getting to know a new community, or doing study abroad, or embarking on a new job, or whatever it is you do, like, you don't always necessarily have to like beat us over the head with like, this is leadership, or this is how I'm curious, or isn't that good news? Like, you don't have to. I remember being frustrated when I was learning to write essays in middle school, and I remember being told, tell us what you're going to do it, and then tell us what you've done. I was like, oh, come on, how dumb is the reader? Like, the reader's not dumb. That's the good news, is like, they'll be able to intuit things and put things together. And again, you don't have to say everything about yourself in a proposal or a personal statement. Some of those things will better come from somebody else. But for some things, You're the only one who can tell us the specifics of how you're thinking of meeting various challenges, or you're the only one who can tell us where that curiosity came from, or what you learned from a past experience about what it takes to be a leader in the field, whatever your field is, and whatever leadership in that field looks like. Because that's the other thing, is like there's no one model of leadership or creativity. There are lots of different ways. Like what it takes to be a leading poet is not the same as what it takes to be a politician necessarily, or what it takes to be an astrophysicist doing really interesting research. And what everybody brings different skills, gifts, and talents, as well as experience to the table. And so this is really a question of trying to figure out what are the things that are most relevant to the proposal and to the fellowship at hand. And again, it's probably a little bit easier once you've done some work thinking about that and brainstorming what kinds of things you might want to bring forward, for you to talk over the specifics of that with Caitlin or me, or other mentors and readers. Sometimes it's really helpful to have, if you have, going back to the question of audience, if you are an astrophysicist, get your roommate who's an English major to read it and see if it makes sense. If you're trying to figure out, does this sound like me, maybe a family member or a friend might be a wonderful reader to say like, whoa, this doesn't sound like you at all. Where's that coming from? Or, oh, wait a minute, you totally forgot about this thing that I think is really relevant and this strength that I see in you. We all benefit from having folks who know us well give us help, and even from strangers who don't know us necessarily well. I'm happy to be the sort of educated non-specialist reader. For those of you who weren't here when I was talking about being an early medieval historian, almost nobody's working in my field, so I'm usually the non-specialist in the room. But that's a really fun position to try to learn about new things, and for me to put my tired, cranky reader's hat on when I'm reading something and try to see where might somebody stumble or be skeptical, so that I can raise those questions with you and we can brainstorm how to address it up front, so that when the actual reader gets hold of this, they don't stumble or they're not skeptical about those things anymore because you've already addressed it. So again, you don't have to do this on your own. Write something down. Get some draft down somewhere and then come talk to somebody about it. That's really the best way to start. And that can also be like, oh, this is really neat. You know what? I love this. Can we flesh that out? Or, oh, wow. We'll be talking about your draft and all of a sudden you'll say, oh my goodness, actually what I really need to say is X. That's part of the fun of this. And it makes our day to have those conversations. So don't be shy about that.
My favorite teacher in my history of education was Karen Wallace, my freshman year of high school. And I would come into her office and just explode ideas all over the place. And she would look at me and she would say calmly, Caitlin, what are you trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Good, write that down. So we all come to the sort of nice, polished version of what we're trying to accomplish. We come to that better with other people helping.
Right. On the other hand, lots of people, if you, it's all about what works for your process. Some
Absolutely.
People think better by talking, some by writing, some by doing, some by making models of things by, I'm a weaver. And one of the things I sometimes do is I'll start weaving something. And if I don't like it, or I'm not sure it's working out right, I unpick it and I try again until I find the thing that's right. So think about the writing process as an iterative process as well. Nobody comes up, remember what I said at the beginning, nobody starts with the kind of beautiful, amazing, fully realized proposal that you read about on websites. Nobody is born with that. It doesn't spring fully formed from the head of Zeus like Athena. It always grows from somewhere. It starts from small, vague, funny looking things and grows into something really interesting. So give yourself the time to do that. And we so look forward to being on that journey with you. Here's the other thing, is that for most fellowships, you know what? If you don't apply this year, you can apply another year. Or if not for this fellowship, something else. If not Watson, maybe Stevens in future. Or You know, see how things go. Don't feel panic stricken about deadlines, but also don't worry that like, I don't have a perfect idea now, I can't do this. You don't know until you try.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to reading your drafts and to talking over your ideas with you. Best of luck.